The golden afternoon light streamed through the windows of the small frontier church as 28-year-old Thomas Mitchell stood at the altar, adjusting his worn vest nervously while waiting for his bride to appear. The entire community of Cedar Valley had gathered for what they expected to be a simple wedding ceremony, but Thomas knew the truth was far more complicated than anyone in those wooden pews could imagine. He was marrying a complete stranger for money. Not her money, his dire need for it. 3 months earlier, Thomas had been on the verge of losing everything. The drought had killed his crops, disease had decimated his cattle, and the bank was threatening foreclosure on the ranch that had been in his family for 3 generations. In desperation, he had placed an advertisement in the eastern newspapers, seeking a wife who could bring a substantial dowry to help save his land. Margaret Ashworth had responded with a letter that was both businesslike and mysterious. She had agreed to his terms, marriage in exchange for a significant financial contribution to his ranch, but had provided few personal details beyond her age and her willingness to relocate to Colorado territory. Their correspondence had been brief and practical, focused on legal arrangements rather than personal compatibility. Thomas had assumed she was probably a spinster of limited prospects, perhaps plain or difficult, seeking security in exchange for her inheritance. He had prepared himself to honor his commitment regardless of personal attraction, viewing their union as a business partnership that would save his family's legacy. Now, as the church doors opened and his bride appeared, Thomas felt his assumptions crumble completely. Margaret Ashworth was nothing like what he had expected. She was younger than he had imagined, with warm brown eyes and golden hair that caught the afternoon light. But more than her physical appearance, there was something about her bearing that commanded attention, a quiet confidence and intelligence that seemed to fill the small church with energy. She wore a simple but elegant cream-colored dress that suggested good taste rather than ostentation, and she walked down the aisle with the measured pace of someone who had made a deliberate choice and was at peace with her decision. When their eyes met, Thomas saw not desperation or resignation, but something that looked remarkably like determination and hope. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of traditional vows and nervous anticipation. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed his new bride with careful respect, aware that they were essentially strangers embarking on what could be either a partnership or a disaster. The reception that followed was held in the church hall, with the entire community contributing food and music for the celebration. Thomas watched in amazement as Margaret moved through the crowd, introducing herself to his neighbors with genuine interest and warmth. She asked thoughtful questions about their farms and families, listened intently to their stories, and somehow managed to make each person feel as if their conversation was the most important part of her day. "Your wife seems like a remarkable woman," commented Samuel Morrison, Thomas's closest neighbor and friend. "You're a lucky man," Thomas nodded, though he was beginning to realize that luck had little to do with what was happening. Margaret's choice to respond to his advertisement and travel across the country to marry him seemed less like desperation and more like a calculated decision made by someone who knew exactly what she was doing. As the evening wore on and the guests gradually departed, Thomas found himself alone with his new wife for the first time since their brief introduction before the ceremony. They sat together on the front porch of his ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains that bordered his property. "This is beautiful land," Margaret said quietly, her eyes taking in the rolling pastures and distant peaks. "How long has your family owned it?" "My grandfather homesteaded here in 1847, Thomas replied. "My father expanded the ranch, and I've been trying to keep it going since he died 5 years ago." Margaret turned to study his profile in the fading light. "You're in financial trouble. That's why you advertised for a wife with a dowry." Thomas felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I should have been more direct about that in my letters. I know it's not the most romantic foundation for a marriage." "I didn't come here expecting romance," Margaret said matter-of-factly. "I came here expecting opportunity." Something in her tone made Thomas look at her more closely. "What kind of opportunity?" Margaret smiled, and for the first time since meeting her, Thomas caught a glimpse of something that might have been excitement beneath her calm exterior. "Tell me about your water situation." she said instead of answering his question directly. Thomas blinked at the unexpected topic. Water? Well, we have the creek that runs along the eastern boundary and a few wells scattered around the property. Why? Show me your property boundaries tomorrow. All of them. And I want to see your books. Every record you have of expenses, income, crop yields, and livestock numbers for the past 5 years. Thomas stared at his new wife in amazement. Margaret, are you sure you're not confusing yourself with a banker rather than a bride? Margaret's laugh was warm and genuine. Thomas, I think there are quite a few things about me that are going to surprise you. The question is whether you're prepared to be surprised. The next morning, Margaret rose before dawn and appeared at the breakfast table dressed in practical riding clothes that she had somehow produced from her modest collection of luggage. Over coffee and biscuits, she peppered Thomas with questions about every aspect of his ranch operation, taking notes in a small leather book with the efficiency of an experienced bookkeeper. Where did you learn so much about farming and livestock? Thomas asked as they prepared to tour the property. My father owned several large farms in Pennsylvania, Margaret replied, checking the cinch on her saddle with practiced hands. I grew up working alongside him, learning every aspect of agricultural management. When he died 3 years ago, everything went to my older brother, who had no interest in my involvement or opinions. Thomas felt a piece of the puzzle click into place. So you came west looking for a place where your knowledge would be valued. I came west looking for a partnership with someone who needed what I could offer and could provide what I needed in return. Margaret mounted her horse, with the ease of someone who had been riding since childhood. The question is whether you're prepared to treat me as a true partner, rather than just a source of funding. As they rode across his land, Thomas found himself seeing his property through Margaret's eyes. She noticed things he had overlooked, drainage patterns that could be improved, grazing areas that were being underutilized, and potential water sources that could be developed. But more than her technical knowledge, he was struck by her genuine enthusiasm for the challenges and possibilities his ranch represented. This land has incredible potential, she said as they stopped on a ridge overlooking the main valley. But you've been thinking too small. What do you mean? Margaret pulled out a folded paper from her saddlebag, a hand-drawn map of his property that she had apparently created while reviewing his land. Records. You're trying to run this ranch the same way your father and grandfather did. But the market has changed completely. Instead of focusing primarily on cattle, you should be diversifying. This soil and climate are perfect for specialty crops that bring premium prices in Denver and the mining towns. She pointed to various areas on her map, each marked with different symbols and notes. This section here gets perfect morning sun and has natural wind protection, ideal for fruit trees. This area has the right drainage for grain crops, and this entire southern pasture could support a much larger number of sheep, which are more profitable per acre than cattle and better suited to this terrain. Thomas studied the map, amazed by the level of detail and thought she had put into analyzing his property. This would require a significant initial investment. Money I don't have. Money we don't have yet, Margaret corrected. But I didn't come here with just a dowry, Thomas. I came here with a plan. Over the following weeks, Margaret systematically revolutionized every aspect of the ranch operation. She renegotiated contracts with suppliers, established new relationships with buyers in Denver, and implemented cost-saving measures that immediately improved their cash flow. But her most dramatic changes were in the actual farming and livestock management. Working alongside Thomas from dawn to dusk, Margaret proved that her knowledge was practical as well as theoretical. She could handle livestock with the skill of an experienced rancher, operate farm equipment with confident efficiency, and make instant decisions about everything from crop rotation to breeding programs. The physical demands of ranch work seemed to energize rather than exhaust her. Thomas watched in amazement as his new wife threw herself into every task with enthusiasm and competence that surpassed his own in many areas. "Where did you really learn all this?" he asked one evening as they reviewed the day's accomplishments over dinner. Margaret looked up from the ledger where she was recording their expenses, a slight smile playing around her lips. "I told you the truth about my father's farms. What I didn't mention was that I essentially managed them for the last 5 years of his life, after his health began to fail. My brother got the credit and the inheritance, but I did the work. Thomas felt a flash of anger at the injustice of her situation. So you came here to find a place where you could get the recognition you deserved. I came here to find a place where I could build something meaningful with someone who would appreciate what I could contribute. Margaret closed the ledger and looked directly at him. The question is whether that someone is you. Thomas reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Margaret, in the past month, you've probably saved my ranch and definitely changed my life. I think I'm beginning to understand that I didn't just gain a wife and a financial partner. I gained someone who's going to make me a better rancher and a better man. Margaret's smile was radiant. That's what I was hoping you'd say. The transformation of the Mitchell Ranch over the following year was nothing short of remarkable. Under Margaret's guidance, they diversified into multiple crops and livestock types, each chosen for maximum profitability and minimal risk. She established contracts with restaurants and hotels in Denver for specialty produce, developed a breeding program for high-quality horses, and even started a small side business selling her renowned preserves and baked goods. But the changes went beyond mere business success. Margaret brought an energy and vision to the ranch that attracted attention from across the territory. Other farmers came to observe her techniques. Women traveled long distances to learn her methods for preserving food and managing household finances. And the ranch became known as a model of innovative agricultural practices. The community's initial surprise at Thomas's good fortune in finding such a capable wife gradually gave way to respect for Margaret as an individual. She was invited to join the local agricultural association, consulted on various community improvement projects, and eventually elected to the school board, where her ideas for practical education revolutionized the local curriculum. Thomas found himself falling in love not just with Margaret's competence and intelligence, but with her passion for creating something lasting and meaningful. She approached their marriage with the same strategic thinking she brought to ranch management, deliberately building intimacy and partnership through shared goals and mutual respect. I have a confession to make, Margaret said one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset over the improved pastures that now supported 3 times the livestock they had the year before. What's that? Thomas asked, though he was smiling because Margaret's confessions usually involved some new improvement. She was planning. I wasn't exactly truthful about my financial situation when I answered your advertisement. Thomas felt a flicker of concern. What do you mean? Margaret pulled a folded letter from her pocket, an official-looking document with impressive letterhead. My father didn't just own farms in Pennsylvania. He owned a great deal of other property as well, including some investments that have been quite successful since his death. The money I brought to our marriage was just a small portion of what I inherited. Thomas stared at the document, which appeared to be a bank statement showing an account balance that was easily 10 times what Margaret had originally contributed to their ranch. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I wanted to make sure you were marrying me for the right reasons. If you had known about my full inheritance, would you have been interested in my ideas and abilities? Or would you have been content to let me provide funding while you continued doing things the old way? Thomas considered this question seriously. You're right. If I had known you were wealthy, I probably would have treated you as a patron rather than a partner. Exactly. And I didn't travel across the country to be anyone's patron. I came here to build something meaningful with someone who would value my contributions beyond my bank account. Thomas set the letter aside and took Margaret's hands in his. So what happens now? Do we expand the ranch? Buy more land? Margaret's eyes sparkled with the look he had learned to associate with her best ideas. Actually, I was thinking we might start a different kind of family business. Something that would use both our skills and create opportunities for other people as well. Over the next few months, Margaret's new plan began to take shape. Instead of simply expanding their own ranch, they began purchasing struggling farms from families who were facing the same financial difficulties Thomas had experienced. But instead of consolidating the land, they developed an innovative partnership program. The original owners remained on their properties as managers, receiving training in Margaret's improved techniques and access to her marketing networks. In exchange, they shared profits with the Mitchell operation and contributed to a cooperative, buying and selling system that benefited everyone involved. The program was so successful that it attracted attention from as far away as Denver and San Francisco. Investors wanted to fund expansion, agricultural colleges sent students to study their methods, and government officials consulted them on rural development policies. Margaret found herself traveling regularly to Denver and other cities, giving presentations to business groups and agricultural associations. Thomas initially worried that her success would take her away from their ranch and their marriage, but he discovered that her achievements only strengthened their partnership. "I couldn't do any of this without you," she told him after returning from a particularly successful trip to the territorial capital. "Not just because you're managing things here while I'm away, but because having a true partner gives me the confidence to take risks I never would have attempted on my own." 5 years after their wedding, Thomas stood in the same church where they had been married, but this time he was watching their eldest daughter, Mary, receive an award for academic achievement. Margaret sat beside him holding their youngest son, while their other 3 children fidgeted in the pew ahead of them. The ranch had grown into a small agricultural empire. The partnership program had expanded across 3 territories, and Margaret had been appointed to the Territorial Agricultural Commission. But Thomas knew that their greatest success was the family they had built together and the community they had helped to create. "Do you ever regret answering my advertisement?" he asked Margaret as they walked home from the ceremony. Margaret shifted baby Jonathan to her other arm and smiled at her husband. "Thomas, I've never regretted a single decision that led me to you and this life, but I do have one more confession to make." Thomas groaned theatrically. "What now? Are you secretly related to railroad barons? Do you own half of Colorado?" Margaret laughed. "Nothing quite that dramatic. But I should probably tell you that I didn't just happen to see your advertisement in the newspaper." "What do you mean?" "I mean I had been researching opportunities in the West for months before your advertisement appeared. I had narrowed my choices down to 3 possibilities, and your ranch was already at the top of my list based on land records and agricultural reports I had obtained." Thomas stopped walking and stared at his wife. "Are you telling me that you specifically chose me?" "I'm telling you that I did my research before making the most important decision of my life. Your advertisement just provided the perfect opportunity to approach you with a proposal that would benefit both of us." Thomas shook his head in amazement. "So our entire marriage was based on your business plan?" "Our marriage was based on my recognition that you were exactly the kind of partner I needed, and my hope that I could be exactly the kind of partner you needed too." Margaret reached up and kissed his cheek gently. "The fact that we fell in love along the way was just proof that I had chosen well." As they continued walking toward their home, Thomas reflected on the mysterious ways that life brought people together. He had advertised for a wife out of desperation, expecting to make a practical arrangement with someone who needed his protection in exchange for financial security. Instead, he had unknowingly attracted a woman who was more capable and accomplished than he had ever dreamed of becoming himself. Margaret had shocked him, just as the townspeople had whispered she would. But she had shocked him with her intelligence, her vision, her capacity for hard work, and her ability to see potential where others saw only problems. She had shocked him by choosing him deliberately rather than settling for him out of necessity. Most of all, she had shocked him by showing him that the best partnerships were built not on what people could provide for each other, but on what they could create together when they combined their strengths and shared their dreams. Looking back at their wedding day, Thomas knew that he had been the luckiest man in Colorado Territory, not because he had married a woman with money, but because he had married a woman with vision who had seen something in him worth investing in, not just financially, but emotionally and intellectually as well. And that, he realized, was worth more than all the gold in the mountains that surrounded their beautiful, thriving ranch. If this story of unexpected partnership and the power of seeing potential in others touched your heart and reminded you that the best relationships are built on mutual respect and shared dreams rather than desperation or convenience, please share it with someone who believes in the transformative power of true partnership. Your support helps us continue creating stories that celebrate the beautiful truth that when two people combine their strengths and vision, they can accomplish far more than either could achieve alone. Subscribe for more tales that remind us all that the most shocking surprises often come from discovering that we're capable of far more than we ever imagined. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community.